The monitors went dark one by one, and with them, the last chance of revenge that Lisa had spent 15 years building. Mark stood in the center of the wreckage. Monitors shattered, servers smoking, the master hard drive destroyed beyond recovery. While his sister collapsed onto the floor, weeping not from pain, but from the loss of everything she'd orchestrated. But that was later. 13 hours earlier, Mark Reynolds was kneeling on the hardwood floor of his daughter's empty room, gripping nothing but a yellow microfiber cloth and the thick, suffocating silence of abandonment. The cloth squeaked rhythmically against the dust-caked windowsill. His thick fingers moved in methodical circles, pushing accumulated grit and dead skin cells toward the edge. The eggshell blue paint of the room bore the faint rectangular outlines where posters had hung for years, images of bands and actors that had defined Lisa's teenage existence before she vanished 2 weeks ago without a note, without a word, leaving only chaos in her wake. Mark didn't know that yet. He kneeled, and his knee joints popped audibly, the sound of cartilage and synovial fluid protesting the weight of a 53-year-old man's body. His hand reached under the built-in desk, the one he'd installed when Lisa was 8, back when she was still his daughter, back when the inheritance hadn't poisoned everything it touched. His fingers closed around something heavy and rectangular. Cold. Black plastic, unremarkable except for the weight of it. He pulled it into the light streaming through the window. A Panasonic Omnivision VHS player, a relic from another era, coated in a thick layer of gray dust so dense it looked like fur. The kind of machine that belonged in a storage unit, not hidden under a desk in 2024. Mark turned it over in his hands. The bottom casing was slightly askew. A silver Phillips head screw lay loose in the corner of the chassis, the threads worn smooth with age. He shook the machine gently, and something inside rattled with a heavy, plastic thud. Too dense to be a circuit board, too substantial to be internal components. His thumbnail found the seam and pried. The bottom panel resisted, then gave way with a sharp snap of breaking plastic tabs. Not video heads inside. Not a tape mechanism. A silver, lacy external hard drive was taped to the interior with strips of black electrical tape, each one applied with mechanical precision. A jagged piece of paper was stuck to the drive's surface with adhesive tape. Red permanent marker. Lisa. Mark's breath caught. He held the drive up to the light, as if he could see through the metal casing to whatever lay encrypted inside. The dust pattern on the floor suggested the VHS player had been undisturbed for months. Years, maybe. A floorboard creaked behind him. The door to the room swung inward, and Maya stood in the doorway. His actual daughter, 16 years old, with the leather-bound journal pressed against her chest like armor. Her eyes went directly to the hard drive in his hand. Her knuckles turned white against the leather binding. Lisa said she'd come back for her things. You shouldn't be touching that. Maya's voice wavered between authority and fear. The oversized sweatshirt she wore hung off one shoulder, the kind of thing kids wore when they were trying to disappear into themselves. Mark had seen that look on her face more in the last 2 weeks than in all the years before. When did she say that? Mark asked. He set the hard drive on the desk, carefully, as if it might detonate. When did you last speak to Lisa? Maya bit her lower lip. She looked away, toward the empty room, toward the ghost of her stepsister's existence. She told me not to tell you about the drive. She said it was insurance. Insurance. Mark felt something cold slide into his stomach, the way a surgeon might feel it when they've accidentally nicked something vital and can't immediately assess the damage. He set the VHS player on the desk beside the drive. Saturday afternoon, he was standing in aisle 4 of the local Kroger, reaching for a red box of Cheerios, when the entire architectural reality of his life fractured. A heavy hand slammed into the shelf beside his ear. Cheerios boxes tumbled like dominoes. The metal shelving rattled with a noise that echoed through the store. Greg stood inches from Mark's face, close enough that Mark could smell the stale beer and sweat that seemed to radiate from his pores like a disease. Greg's eyes were bloodshot. His neck veins bulged with the kind of pressure that suggested they might explode at any moment. "Where is she, Reynolds? Where did that bitch go after she ruined my life?" The fluorescent lights overhead reflected in Greg's dilated pupils. Two tiny, bright points of fury. Greg grabbed Mark's collar, twisting the fabric of his polo shirt. Mark reacted from instinct more than thought, his left arm coming up in a clean parry that knocked Greg's hand away. Greg lunged again with a clumsy right hook that grazed Mark's cheekbone, leaving a line of fire across his face. Mark's palm drove into Greg's chest, solid, two-handed, all the weight behind it. The shove sent Greg sprawling backward into a display of glass salsa jars. They exploded in a rain of red sauce and jagged shards. The sound was immense. The red liquid pooled around Greg's head like a halo. Mark stood over him, fists clenched, breathing heavily. "Get up and walk away, Greg. I don't know what you're talking about." Greg wiped red sauce from his mouth. He looked at his hand as if it were blood. A wet, hysterical laugh came up from his chest. He pointed a trembling finger at Mark, his hand shaking with the violence of his laughter. "She has it all, Mark. She showed me the tapes of my wife. She's probably got you on film too, you pathetic sap." Late that night, the rain lashing against the windows of Mark's home office like gravel thrown by an angry hand. His laptop screen glowed blue in the darkness. His fingers flew across the keyboard, entering commands into the black terminal window. A progress bar flickered across the screen. Decryption, 99%. The thunder rumbled somewhere distant. Mark's eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't blinked in 40 minutes. The screen turned white. A video window opened. Grainy footage. Hidden camera angle from the corner of a bedroom. His bedroom. The timestamp in the corner read, July 14th, 11:42 p.m. The image was imprecise, dust-laden, the kind of quality that came from a pinhole camera hidden behind something, a picture frame maybe, or the corner of a wall. A figure entered the room. Lisa. She moved with the purposeful grace of someone executing a plan. She wasn't searching for anything. She was planting a small black device behind the headboard of Mark's bed, applied with black electrical tape in precise, overlapping strips. She turned toward the camera, smiled directly into the lens, and blew a kiss. Mark's hand trembled as he reached for the mouse. He minimized the video and opened a folder. Family roots. Icons of scanned documents filled the screen. He clicked on one. Birth certificate. 1988. Father, Arthur Reynolds. Mother, Elena Valeska. Name of child, Lisa Valeska Reynolds. Arthur Reynolds, that was his father's name. His father's legal name. His father's name that had been stamped on his own birth certificate 30 years before. The rain intensified, a downpour now, drowning out the sound of his own breathing. Mark whispered to the empty room, to the laptop screen, to the uncaring darkness. "She's my sister?" The following morning, Mark's white Ford F-150 sat 2 cars behind a silver Lexus SUV on the suburban highway. His hands gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2. His knuckles were white. His jaw was clenched so tightly he could feel the grinding of his back molars. The Lexus swerved through a yellow light. Mark downshifted and accelerated, cutting off a minivan in the process. Horns blared. He didn't register them. A black sedan with tinted windows screeched out of a side street. The impact was violent and total. the front fender of the sedan slamming into the side of Mark's truck with a noise like the world breaking. Metal screamed on metal. Sparks flew from the grinding wheel wells. Mark's head snapped toward the side window, his vision fragmenting for a moment. The truck fishtailed. Mark fought the steering wheel, his foot dancing between brake and accelerator. A J-turn, hard. His truck spun, smoke pouring from the tires. The concrete barrier appeared and disappeared. The black sedan was lost in the smoke. The silver Lexus was gone. Mark's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Sweat stung his eyes. His voice came out fractured and animal. Who the hell are these people? The neighborhood was collapsing. Mark walked down Sycamore Lane on an overcast afternoon, and everything was wrong. The Miller family was throwing their belongings onto the lawn. Clothes, furniture, a television still in its box. Mr. Miller was screaming at his wife, holding a stack of printed emails. His face was purple with rage. His wife was crying into her hands. Their daughter stood in the open garage, watching with the expression of someone who has just learned that gravity doesn't exist. Lisa was visible in the background, leaning against a tree. Her sundress was bright yellow, a splash of color against the gray sky and the gray misery of the moment. Her smile was serene, predatory. She was watching the Millers the way a naturalist watches an ecosystem collapse. She pushed off the tree and walked toward Mark. The smell of expensive perfume hit him like a physical force, something floral and obscene in its luxury. She stopped 2 feet away, keeping the distance of someone who knows she has leverage. Honesty is such a messy thing, isn't it, big brother? Mark lunged. He grabbed her by the upper arm. Her expression didn't change. She looked down at his hand, really looked at it, as if it were an interesting artifact, then back at his face. She pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket and held it up. The red light was glowing. Careful. I'm currently recording a domestic assault. Think about Maya. Mark's grip loosened. His hand fell away. Lisa stepped back, her smile widening. Arthur Reynolds sat in a plaid armchair, a wool blanket over his legs. The assisted living apartment smelled like industrial cleaner and something else. Something that Mark had come to recognize as the smell of people waiting to die. Arthur held an old, yellowed photograph. His hands shook so much the photo fluttered like a wounded bird. Mark stood over him, holding the birth certificate. Tell me the truth, Dad. Now. Arthur coughed, a dry rattling sound that came from deep in his chest. He looked at a locked wooden box on his side table. He pointed a gnarled finger toward it. Mark grabbed the box and smashed the lock against the corner of the table with a violent crack. The wood splintered. The contents fell out. Ledger books, their pages yellowed and cracked with age. Mark flipped through one. Columns of numbers. Payments made to Eva Leska for years, suddenly stopping 15 years ago. A final letter was tucked inside, the envelope addressed in handwriting that shook with emotion. You took the company, Arthur. You left us with nothing. Lisa will know. The date on the letter was 1995. Arthur's voice was barely a whisper. I didn't think she'd ever come for you, Mark. The oxygen concentrator hissed. Arthur closed his eyes. The photograph slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor. It showed a younger Arthur with a dark-haired woman. They were smiling at the camera. They looked happy. They looked like people who didn't know what they were building. The backyard was strung with colored lights that cast everything in a sickly carnival hue. Mark's neighbors moved through the space like extras in someone else's film. He could feel the weight of their eyes. He could hear the low murmur of gossip underneath the music, the specific, pointed quality of whispers about him. Greg was talking to a group of men, pointing toward Mark. Their expressions matched. Suspicion. Disgust. The kind of looks that meant Lisa had been thorough. Mark pulled out his phone. He called Maya. It went straight to voicemail. He checked the call log. 10 missed calls, all from the last 2 hours, all unanswered. The panic came up from his chest like bile. He pushed through the crowd. His shoulder knocked a drink from someone's hand. The beer splashed across the lawn. No one said anything. They just watched. Maya, Maya, answer me. The basement window exploded inward. Glass crunched under Mark's boots as he dropped onto the concrete floor. He swept the darkness with a flashlight beam. It caught tactical boots. Before his mind could process movement, a taser prong hit his chest. Electric blue light, 50,000 volts. His muscles seized. His teeth clicked together with a force that nearly broke his jaw. A large man in a black tactical vest stepped out of the shadows and drove a knee into Mark's ribs. Mark's head hit concrete. The world went soft. When it came back into focus, he was zip-tied to a chair in a living room lit by monitors. 18 screens. Each one showed a different hidden camera feed from a different neighborhood house. Kitchen, bedroom, bathroom. The intimate spaces where people believed themselves to be alone. Lisa stood in front of the monitors, holding a master remote. She was smiling. Behind her, on one of the screens, Maya was visible in a locked room. Maya was crying. Our father destroyed one family to build his empire. I'm going to destroy this entire town to finish his legacy. Mark struggled against the zip ties. The plastic cut deep into his wrists. Blood began to seep down his hands. He could see his father's assisted living room on one of the screens. The room was empty. Lisa's hand hovered over the Upload All button. A countdown on the screen read, 0005 year. He's an old man, Lisa. He's dying. Leave Maya out of this. Mark's hand, hidden behind his back, fumbled for a shard of glass he'd tucked into his sleeve during the basement struggle. He sawed at the zip tie with slow, methodical movements. The plastic resisted. He pressed harder. His wrists burned. The enforcer was turned away, watching the upload progress. The zip tie snapped with a sharp pop. Mark stayed still for a moment, waiting. The enforcer didn't turn around. Mark's heart was beating so hard he could see his shirt moving. He took one breath, then another. As the enforcer leaned in to check the ties, Mark exploded upward. The glass shard drove into the man's thigh. Mark followed with a thunderous headbutt. The enforcer's nose shattered like porcelain. The man stumbled backward, blood pouring down his face. Mark picked up a heavy decorative brass statue from the mantel. He swung it like a sledgehammer into the central server rack. Sparks erupted in a blinding cascade. The monitors went dark one by one. Electronic pops, shattering glass, the smell of ozone and burning plastic. Lisa lunged for the hard drive, but the room was plunging into darkness. She tripped over a cable. Her face hit the desk. She looked up, sobbing, not from pain, but from the loss of everything she'd orchestrated. 15 years of work, 15 years of planning, all of it destroyed in 30 seconds. Mark stood over her, breathing heavily. His forehead was split open from the headbutt. Blood ran into his eyes. It stops here, Lisa. I'm taking Maya. Don't ever look back. The sun was rising when Mark reached his porch. The sky was turning from navy to pale orange. He sat on the steps, hair matted with dried blood. Maya sat beside him, her head on his shoulder. She was asleep, or pretending to be. Mark opened his phone. He navigated to a cloud-synced file he'd managed to save before the servers went dark. A video. Arthur, much younger, maybe 30, sitting in a hospital room, holding a newborn baby. Lisa. He was crying. I'll find a way to make it right, little one. You're a Reynolds. no matter what they say. The timestamp in the corner read, February 1988. Mark closed the video. He looked out at the quiet street. The birds were beginning to sing. The world was waking up to another Saturday morning, the kind that looked identical to 10,000 other Saturday mornings, except that everything had changed. He realized something then. Lisa didn't want to destroy the town because she hated them. She wanted to destroy the town because she wanted to be one of them. She wanted to belong. And when she discovered she couldn't, when she discovered that the man she believed was her father had abandoned her, that she was the product of a relationship her own father had tried to erase, she decided that if she couldn't belong, she would unmake the entire structure. Mark stood up carefully, so as not to disturb Maya. He walked to the trash can at the edge of his driveway. He looked at the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he tossed it in. The metallic clang of the phone hitting the bottom echoed. Let's go inside, Maya. It's over. Maya stirred. She looked up at him, her eyes still half closed with sleep or trauma or both. She stood without saying anything. Mark put his arm around her shoulders. They walked toward the house. The door closed behind them. The street was empty. The morning light continued to rise. The neighborhood, broken, poisoned, contaminated with secrets, looked exactly as it had the day before. No one would know that everything had changed. No one would know about the destroyed servers, the erased files, the blackmail that never went public because the infrastructure of it had been smashed to nothing. They would only know that Lisa Reynolds had disappeared. They would wonder about her for a while. Then they would forget, or try to, because that was what people did with the parts of their lives that didn't make sense. Mark made coffee. He sat with Maya in the kitchen. They didn't talk. They just sat in the quiet and waited for the day to properly begin, for the sun to fully rise, for the world to continue its rotation as if nothing had happened at all. Outside, the first neighbors began to emerge. The street started to wake up. The block party cleanup would happen later. People would figure out what to do about the Millers who were leaving town. The gossip would continue for a while, then fade into the background noise of suburban life. The mechanisms of rumor and suspicion that Lisa had so carefully constructed would eventually collapse under their own weight, become just another story that people had heard about once, long ago. Mark didn't know this yet. He only knew that Maya was safe. He only knew that his father, the man who had made all of this possible through his weakness and his silence, was still alive in assisted living, still waiting for the end. He only knew that Lisa was somewhere in the chaos she'd created, without her leverage, without her power, without the infrastructure that had defined her existence. It wasn't justice. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't healing. It was just the stopping of something, the prevention of catastrophe. In the kitchen, Maya's coffee steamed in her cup. The morning light continued to brighten. Time moved forward in its normal way, indifferent to the destroyed lives, the poisoned connections, the secrets that would remain buried because the apparatus for exposing them had been obliterated. Mark thought about the video of his father, the one showing a moment of genuine love and connection. He thought about Lisa watching that room on one of those monitors, seeing her father, not as a man who had abandoned her, but as a man who had loved her in his own broken, inadequate way. He thought about how that love wasn't enough, how it never could be enough. But he didn't speak these thoughts. He just sat with his daughter in the kitchen of his suburban house and waited for the day to become whatever it was going to become. The coffee cooled. The light changed. The world continued on.